listening to the Retail Razor Show, where your expert hosts and their guests cut through the clutter in retail and retail tech to shape the future of retail.
Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 12 of the Retail Razor Show. I'm your host, Ricardo Belmar.
And I'm your co-host, Casey Golden. Welcome to retail's favorite podcast for product junkies, commerce technologists, and everyone else in retail and retail tech alike.
Well, Casey, we have made it to our last recording live and in person at Groceryshop, which means this brings our latest crossover event with This Week in Innovation podcast and special guest host, Jeff Roster, to a close.
This has been such an amazing series of conversations. Still may not make it next year, but you guys are doing a really good job keeping me in the recap and the loop. So starting with a great recap of Grocery Shop with the content team themselves, Christina Gustafson and Ben Miller. Then an awesome discussion with Shish Shidar and the startup scene at the show. You even included some interesting predictions going into 2024 for that one.
Yes, true. Indeed, we did.
And then the last episode, you and Jeff got deep into retail media networks with Andrew Lipsman, which I have to say is always a fun conversation. So what do we have on tap for our listeners and viewers for the final installment in the series?
Well, this is a special treat. Jeff and I had the pleasure of reconnecting with Neil Redding, head of product at Auki Labs, who, of course, was on the show earlier this season, episode 2, if I remember correctly. And he was here to talk about spatial computing, a term that's only just been hitting the news a lot because of Apple's Vision Pro augmented reality headset announcement. So Neil was at Groceryshop launching the very product that he previewed with us on the show.
Very cool.
Yeah, so turns out that Neil and Auki also introduced what I think is a pretty powerful use case. So one centered on store teams and augmenting the capabilities of those frontline workers with augmented reality. In fact, I saw a demo at Auki's booth where a store associate, let's say, needs to restock a shelf of, ramen noodles or something. Well, let's say this is a new employee too, and they don't have the store layout quite memorized yet. So how do they find the right aisle as quickly and efficiently as possible and the right shelf? Well, it's simple now with this solution. They use their smartphone and the Auki Labs software, and the app literally guides them on screen with a navigational path and arrows and everything, right? Just like you would expect a navigation app would anywhere, right? Down to the aisle and shelf level. And then when they look at the shelf, it's AR. So it shows them an exact placement of the product they're carrying and where it's supposed to go on that shelf. So there's no question what the planogram is supposed to be and no guesswork on part of the store associate.
Well, that's a nice efficiency booster. I can see how this would be a big improvement for store teams.
Yeah.
Usually you're just thrown into with the sharks.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So while last time Neil talked with us about consumer-facing applications of this technology, this time we were a little more focused on the operational side of things. So really good discussion about that, about augmenting store teams and about everything else Auki Labs launched at Groceryshop in spatial computing space.
Well, that just so happens to be a great connecting point to our first segment on the show. So before we get into the discussion with Neil, what do you think about doing a short detour and talking about something completely different, about becoming a great retail leader and a good friend of the show that honesty needs no introduction?
It's time for one of our newest segments on the show, Blade to Greatness, where we hear from a retail industry leader who shares their insights and wisdom on how to excel in this dynamic and competitive field. In this segment, we learn about the essential skills and qualities that every retail executive needs to lead their teams and their business to success. Whether we're talking about the corporate office or stores, we'll uncover valuable tips and advice that you can apply to your own retail career growth.
Today, we'll speak with Ron Thurston, co-founder of Auki, best-selling author of Retail Pride, podcast host, speaker, advisor, and board member. Ron leverages his extensive experience leading retail operations for America's most prominent brands to bring attention to the issues facing frontline workers and retail leaders today. After releasing his book, Retail Pride, and the Retail in America tour and podcast, Ron has co-founded Auki to disrupt how the retail industry hires, engages, and connects retail workers with retail brands and technology partners.
Today he's here to talk to us about an incredibly important aspect of change and culture that every retail leader needs to foster, implementing a career development culture as the first step to change your mindset and make change. Let's listen to what Ron has to share with us.
Welcome, Ron.
Great. Thank you so much, Casey. I love a conversation about how to retain and have career development within retail because it is by far the number one thing I hear and also shows up in surveys around why I stay in retail or why I don't stay in retail is about mentorship and career development conversation. There's no exception to that. It's not compensation. Certainly a lot of conversation about flexibility and work in part-time, but the majority of anyone who's worked in brick and mortar retail who has chosen to stay in this role because they love it, is because we're having important career trajectory conversations, which may or may not be within the organization. They may be ones that take you to a different company, but someone has really guided you in that journey. And I wanted to just spend a couple of moments because I was recently doing a webinar with Sucharita Kadali from Forrester, and they just released some statistics that I think are fascinating. So if you missed that webinar, I wanted to share part of the turnover is that retail does have higher turnover than other industries. So in April of 2022, a little more than a year ago, the average turnover in all trades is 3% per month. So quit rates are the total number of quits during the entire month as a percentage of employees. So on average in every industry in April 2022, 3% of the workforce turned over in a month. In retail, it was 4.4% of the total workforce. And today, as we sit, both have gone down. So April 2023, it's 2.5% in all industries. And in retail, it's gone down a full percentage point to 3.5, which is great news because there was a lot of conversation about not being able to hire and therefore have high turnover rate. So good news, it's going down, but there are still real pain points. One around inconsistent and unpredictable scheduling, around benefits like limited employer sponsored benefits, little or no career advancement, and understaffing. And the reason, the understaffing becomes such an important point in retention because it said in April 2022, 63% of workers say that staff shortages are contributing to their burnout. And that led to lost work days and to depression and anxiety and sick days. All of this is because of staff shortages. So as quit rates have gone down, there's still a staff shortage problem. That there's a very high cost to what that means. This kind of idea of how culture and brand and how you communicate that in conjunction with career development is a critical component to retention. So the good news, again, just to summarize, quit rates going down, yet we still have significant amount of open, and we have a significant amount of people who are making decisions about staying in retail based on career conversations that may or may not be happening today. That's part of Auki is also let's assess where you are in your career and let's suggest some other opportunities for career advancement based on your current skill set.
So, Ron, one of the things that has always struck me in this topic is that in the past, we've always heard a lot of retailers using phrases like, our store teams, they are the front line that represents our brand to the consumer. And when you hear that, you would always think, well, then they must really highly value those employees and because of that, if they really are the face of the brand to that customer, then surely you're doing everything you can to develop their skills, their not just sales skills, but other operational skills to make them better serve those customers and offer them a career path so that they stay with you in that brand. But I think historically, what we all know is that even though we heard retailers say that, it didn't really hold true, right? It wasn't really, you didn't see that at the end. And when you talk to those store teams, most store teams didn't feel like that what was coming. I'd like to say that it's gotten better, And I think just hearing you talk about it, it gets pretty clear what some of the things that need to happen. That's a mindset that does need to change and to become more of a practical reality. I mean, do you believe that's definitely where we're trending? And do you think that maybe what we saw during the pandemic and what happened with stores, that's been that final push that has gotten retailers at the executive level to move in this direction?
I wish, Ricardo, I could say consistently yes. I think there are great demonstrations where that has been true. And there are things that we have never learned. And some of the same bad habits exist. And so I do have opportunity to speak to a lot of candidates that are either currently in job search or thinking about making a change. And so much of it is related to exactly what you say. And that the frontline teams and every retail brand have so many of the answers that you want to learn about your customer, about the product, about why they choose to shop with you, why they convert, why they don't. The people who engage with a live customer and converts or doesn't understands exactly why, because you've had really thorough conversations, and it's data you will never be able to capture on a website. You never know why 90+% of the people on your site never convert. You don't know why. Sometimes you'll get a pop-up survey. I'm sure the response rates on that are pretty low. But in a store, where I think some of this falls down is if someone would just ask me, I would tell you exactly what needs to change. And so creating forums where I shouldn't say what needs to change, where we could improve or where product can be better, or inventory levels or store design, all of this, it can actually be captured by people who are standing in front of their customer every day. And so creating forums to do that, whether it's store visits, it's coffee talks, it's Zoom meetings, it's town halls, whatever works for you. That I think retention and that conversation are so inextricably linked. Just last weekend, I was in Sawgrass Malls here in Florida, went into a store and into someone who used to work for me. And the first thing that he said was, I remember when you visited the store and you sat down with us and had coffee in the morning before we opened, and you asked us all what we loved about working here, what we didn't, what we could do better as a company, how we could improve. Let's talk about product. Tell me what your customer is saying today. For me, it was an hour of time spent and, $10 worth of Starbucks. And this person years later remembers that meeting. And wow. You can't underestimate the power of what that means to field teams to just sit and listen and act and respond. It's the greatest thing you can do to retain your teams.
Yeah, I think you really set an example with your Retail in America tour for everyone to get back into the stores. Even when it was the least convenient, you really showed a way of doing this. Because if I worked on a retail floor and I was looking for a job change, you'd be my number one dream phone call, right? I would already be following you on LinkedIn. You would already be like the ideal, I've got to get a meeting with Ron. I'm looking for a career change. So I think that you've become this great ambassador. And I think that bridge, it's hard for other people to say how to grow, how to develop these types of cultures. And I just feel like it's so much of your DNA that you offer that you're just like a natural resource. So I'm so grateful that you join all these conversations and these podcasts to really open that up to say there is a resource, there is a way, because I think on both sides, they both want to come to you.
Thank you, Casey. That's really kind. I would say it's easier to do than you think it is. And that engagement is nothing more than honest and thoughtful and empathetic conversation. And we all know how to do that. But just doing it is the first step. And, whatever that needs to look like. And I just think sometimes we're afraid to take that first step because you're also afraid of maybe what you're going to hear. Sometimes it's like you coach the team before the CEO arrives and you say, well, make sure you don't talk about this and don't do that. And I would come from the place of, tell me the worst thing. What do you hate about working here? Tell me. and in a very like thoughtful and honest way, because they want you to tell me the truth. So sometimes I think we're afraid to ask the questions because we're afraid of what we're going to hear. And we can't improve if we don't know. We can't change retention. Core of this conversation is retaining great people. You can't retain them if you don't provide the opportunity to tell the truth and then change it. And that for me is the best thing you could do, is to say, you know what? I'm so glad we had that meeting. I didn't actually know that. And therefore, this is what we're going to do differently at our company today. And maybe award that person next company town hall, say, well, great. The best idea for the year came from Casey when I visited the store. Like there are ways to create culture that is about feedback and about recognition that is so powerful, yet so easy to do.
Yeah, I think that is a great way to summarize what those specific key traits are that every retail leader should take away from this conversation, and how to make that culture better, and how to really work towards retaining those important store teams that you have today, and making it more enticing for the new ones, for the new folks that you have coming in. So Ron, thank you so much for sharing these thoughts and words of wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Ricardo and Casey. It's a pleasure.
So many great points Ron made that relate to developing retail careers, mentoring, and so much more.
Yeah, as always, Ron really knows how to talk through all these challenging issues facing frontline store teams, and he always does it in a way that just opens your mind to better understand why these challenges and issues matter so much. So many of them don't need to be so difficult if, let's face it, retail execs just reframe how they perceive their employees' skills and talent, and have a willingness to really develop and nurture those skills in an environment that openly explores the best way to do it, growing their talent, retaining that talent, and enticing new talent to join the organization and be excited about working there.
I completely agree.
Well, what do you say, Casey? Should we jump right into our final grocery shop discussion?
Absolutely. Let's get right to it and enjoy the conversation you and Jeff Roster had with Neil Redding, head of product at Auki Labs.
Welcome, everybody. We are here at Grocery Shop 2023. I'm Ricardo Belmar, and I am once again teaming up with our good friend Jeff Roster from This Week in Innovation for some exceptionally interesting and insightful interviews for the show. Jeff, how you doing today?
I'm doing phenomenal. It's a great day here in Las Vegas. The conference center is sparkling. It's a beautiful walk. A little problem with some of these infrastructure, but other than that, everything's fantastic.
Yeah, we'll not say any more on that. But we are fortunate, though, today to have a returning guest to the show that we last spoke with at the Shop Talk, in fact, Neil Redding from Auki Labs. And Neil is joining us today with a fascinating update. When we last spoke with Neil, and first of all, Neil, welcome back to the show. When we last spoke, what you were telling us, we were talking about spatial computing. When we spoke, it was right at the time that Apple announced their Vision Pro device, and we were talking about the implications of that to commerce. And since then, Neil, I think you have some exciting news to share with us about what Auki Labs is launching.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Ricardo and Jeff. Great to see you again as well. Great to be here at Grocery Shop. So yeah, the punchline is that at Auki Labs, we're a tech startup, been running for a couple of years now, building a spatial computing protocol and infrastructure. So as you mentioned, when we spoke last at Apple Vision Pro launch right after Shop Talk, right, in early June, they announced, or Tim Cook announced, that actually there's this new era beginning that they're calling the era of spatial computing, building on personal computing and mobile computing. And so we felt very gratified that we're aligned with where Apple's indicating that the puck is headed, or where things are headed. But what we're doing now at Grocery Shop, and also simultaneously at Paris Retail Week in Paris, is launching our platform called Convergence, which we call a spatial computing platform for retail. So that's what we're up to here. And obviously, I think we'll get more into what that is and why it's relevant, I think, to grocery retailers and CPG.
Yeah, well, why don't we jump into that? So I'm fascinated. I think when we last spoke, we were talking maybe a little bit more generically of how spatial computing could change commerce for retailers, but not for Grocery Shop. Let's dig into what the unique aspect is here and value that you're bringing for grocers.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, when we last spoke, we were speaking specifically about the area of focus that we had the first half of this year, really, or most of this year at Auki Labs, building this retail-focused platform. which was being able to present promotions and retail media style content in augmented reality at specific locations throughout a place of commerce, like a retail store, right? So without having to print, we could create and dynamically place, just like you do on a CMS for a website, constantly updatable promotional content wherever you want in the store. Think promotional banners or signage in the store, but done digitally in augmented reality on shoppers' personal devices, like on their iPhones or Android phones. So that's great. And we're getting a lot of excitement and continue to about that proposition, the shopper marketing proposition. But what we've also realized in the past few months is that there is a even more immediate way that retailers, and particularly grocery retailers, can use this technology, this spatial computing platform that allows the placement of any kind of digital information at specific physical locations in a store. And that is the retail operations and associate productivity realm. And what we found is that many grocery retailers are really excited about the ability to place task information, notes from store managers to staff or between staff at specific locations within the store, and that their retail task management, which is in use as a product category across most stores these days, does fall short a little bit in terms of clarifying and clearly communicating the physical location that many tasks need to be done within the store. So there might be a task, for example, in a standard retail task management workflow that says, restock this shelf with this kind of cereal, or fix this display, or fix this shelf in this part of the store. But the description in the task might be abstract and difficult for particularly, say, a new associate to understand, right? So communication about location and the physical context for a task is difficult in the abstract. Even if they have physical maps, sometimes it's hard for people to find that out. So what we're able to do uniquely with our ability to precisely place this kind of digital information in physical space is bring people to the actual physical location where a task needs to be performed, right? So this is one dimension of the retail operations platform or set of applications that we're bringing, being able to do task management in physical locations. Another aspect of this, and there's another app that we've built, runs on our platform that does this, is solving the picking and restocking use case specifically, right? So there's a lot of money and time that retailers spend on onboarding and training, right? There's huge turnover, right? I think at Walmart, last year's turnover was something like 44%, right? It's a large number. And so every time there's a new employee onboarded, or even new staff that comes from a different location that's unfamiliar with that particular store's layout, there's time that's required, right? From someone who's already familiar in the store, like using a buddy system to let them know what's where. And there's just a ramp up time, right? An onboarding time. And that is expensive, especially when thought of at scale across many hundreds of thousands of employees, right? At large chains. And so what our app that's called Search enables new associates, or really any associates to do, is at the level of the SKU or the barcode, like know what a product is and be able to be guided directly to it where it's being stocked or where it needs to be restocked in the store. So this is also possible, providing turn-by-turn navigation throughout the store using this spatial computing platform. And a third use case is actually planogram focused, right? So there's often, again, with new associates, lack of clarity and difficulty communicating what good looks like, right? What the picture of success looks like in terms of merchandising. And stores use planograms, but those are often difficult to apply in context when you're standing there at the shelf, knowing what it should look like. What we're able to do is actually drop planograms as an asset that you can experience in augmented reality and see that in front of the shelf as you're stocking it, right? If you're a new associate. So you have that just-in-time contextual guidance about what product to place where. And if you look at videos that we have on our YouTube channel at Auki Labs or at aukilabs.com/convergent, you'll see video that illustrates this, because really seeing is believing when we're talking about augmented reality. I mean, here we're just having a voice conversation, but I mean, this came up last time, right? You really need to be able to see this. Right. But so we'll put in the show notes, I think. Or you can just go directly to aukilabs.com/convergent.
So I'm picturing in the store from a workforce management point of view, I like these use cases. I have my store can basically go out into the store with a mobile device, and essentially you're saying they're going to look at a given aisle, hold the mobile device, and through AR, there may be notes for different tasks that need to be accomplished in that aisle. If it's replenishment against the planogram, that's going to show up in that view. So the employee knows immediately what work needs to be done in that shelf without having to actually look. Literally, I guess I'm thinking they don't really have to scan the aisle. They're going to look on the screen, and through AR, it's going to tell them what's within view and what work needs to be done.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, one way to think of it is just annotations on the physical environment in augmented reality on a device. It could be, a tablet that's provided by the store. Really, the technology can just run in a BYOD way, meaning, store associates can bring their own devices to work and then have these apps that are part of the Convergent platform loaded onto their devices as long as they're capable of augmented reality. So they do have to, at this point, be towards the high end of iPhone or Android device capability. But increasingly, most phones are capable of this. So yeah, there's the ability to just, as a store associate, increase your productivity by seeing precisely placed digital guidance about what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, who it's assigned to, what good looks like in terms of planograms, in terms of tasks, and all that. So we think, and the pilots that we've got underway now, because we're based in Hong Kong primarily, actually, there's a lot of grocery retail there that is very excited about these particular use cases and have been helping us do really product discovery around these use cases. And so they're finding a lot of value, these particular use cases, and we're building them out for them. Well, grocery retail.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So when we last talked, it was more customer facing, and this is very store associate facing. Classic analyst question: where does this technology sit? Is it store task management? Or is this a whole new category that you're talking?
So if we take a step back and reference again the fact that Tim Cook and Apple have heralded this emerging new era of spatial computing, right? We believe for years at Auki Labs, and I independently for years before that digital and physical are coming together, right? Over time, and I know we've talked about this before, and you're an enthusiast for this as well, Jeff, right? That
I'm still waiting for my use case.
But he's still an enthusiast.
I'm still an enthusiast.
I mean, yeah, I called myself an enthusiast about this for a while, but it feels, right, inevitable that eventually digital information that has a physical context will show up in the world, right? That we're not going to be looking down at these black slabs in our hands forever. And so to answer your question, like, what is this product, right? I mean, we are in the throes of figuring out, like, how do we present our capabilities differently to both the shopper marketing context and the retail operations or retail task management context. And we have capabilities in both areas, right? Shopper marketing, as we talked about, is continues to be an area. It feels like there's a longer sales cycle. There's a longer lead time to actually bringing the ability to place promotions in the context of first-party apps that many retailers have. And we're working with several large ones to integrate our capabilities into their mobile apps so that when you're shopping at, it's going to make it up, a Kroger or a Walmart or any number of other grocery retailers, there's already a certain amount of uptake with their mobile apps for loyalty purposes, for, in some cases, as you put products in your cart, you can scan them, and then you can optimize your checkout process when you get to checkout. We want to enable those apps to also have the ability to see these kinds of promotions in context as you move through the aisle and be able to discover them and be guided to them digitally in augmented reality. So that's happening, and there's traction there, but I think there's a longer time to make all of that happen. Those of us who've worked in retail and understand
there's an adoption curve there, right?
There's just lead cycles, right, to get there. But what we're finding is that in the more immediate time frame, as I mentioned, grocery retailers are finding that they can optimize and shave time off everyday tasks. And, a simple way to put it is if you can shave even a few seconds off tasks that are performed by dozens, if not hundreds of associates throughout the day, every day, particularly with new associates, right, that just have this learning curve and there's this knowledge transfer time period that costs real money. And if you can have apps that run on their phones that allow them to avoid having to go find a more senior, more familiar associate to answer a question like, how do I do this? How should I stock this? Where is this product? Or even just the everyday use case of e-commerce order picking, right? There's often unfamiliar pickers have to come in and find where each product is to fulfill an e-commerce order, right? And so what we can provide is literally take an order that's coming in from e-commerce and provide a prioritized list and a turn-by-turn navigation kind of guidance through the store to fulfill that pick list and really optimize that whole trip for the picker with this same technology, right? Because it's all about understanding and having these annotations where each of these products are.
So there's definitely a workforce efficiency that you're pitching there that translates to a labor cost savings. And if I just, by your example, if you were in the keynote session with Kroger's CEO today, even mentioned one of the challenges with online and digital grocery is that you've got increased costs and you have to find a way to reduce those to get some profitability back out of that as more and more people want to go digital. So I think you're offering a component of that then by reducing time to complete certain tasks by the store staff. And that should translate to a cost savings if you can get those employees then working on something that has a higher value.
Right. No, I mean, we know it translates to cost savings, right? Yeah. Because it's simple math, right? Again, there's the turnover numbers that we know, like 44%.
Yeah, there's a training benefit you have
there's
too.
The training benefit. I mean, think of it like this. There's training is required because there isn't an ability to just immediately know if you're an associate. Where is this product? Where should it be stocked? Where is this task that needs to be performed? What's the physical location in the store that needs to be performed? If you don't already know, you can either ask another human, another colleague, or you could have a contextual guidance from the device that's already in your hand, right? Which is the case, right? I mean, store associates just like us tend to have our devices in our hands. And so what we're actually seeing is the ability to remove some of the training needs, some of the training burden and the time associated with training, and of course the cost associated with training.
It almost feels like spatial computing might be something we forecast to. And then we solve that problem of, is it store? Clearly it's both store associate facing and consumer facing. But then what do the analyst community, what do we do? Well, if we net out on spatial computing, then that just becomes another tech bucket that we put things in.
It is. I mean, so we talked before, right, about shoppers finding what they're looking for, right? Sometimes shoppers come in, and when we talk about promotions, there are many shoppers, especially in an era of high inflation, that what they're looking for is what's on sale, right? That's what they're searching for as they come into the store. And so the same technology, I mean, having been a technologist my whole career, there's a way in which we look at problems and see the common threads across different product categories, right? And I absolutely hear what you're saying. As an analyst, we want to say, what category bucket does this product fit into, right? But from a capability perspective, we're like, well, shoppers and retail store associates both have the same need of finding out where something is or where something should be in the physical space called the store, right? Pickers, shoppers, everyday associates that are just doing general tasks, right? So we can offer all of them the ability to get from where they are to where the products are that they want or where the tasks are that they need to perform. It's the same technology, right? So like I said earlier, I mean, we're in the throes we've launched this. We're in pilot phases with a number of retailers. We're rolling it out as a beta program to North America and Europe now. And we're working closely with these pilot customers to evolve what this product is and how it shows up in each of their businesses.
I noticed you're not using the word augmented reality much and really using the term spatial computing. So is that what you're, as you move into the further down the road, you're just going to adopt that term?
Yeah, it's a good observation, Jeff. We've been using the term spatial computing at Auki Labs for a couple of years. We've also used the term augmented reality. I mean, and they are slightly different, right? I mean, spatial computing is really essentially the ability, giving computers and digital devices the ability to understand where they are in a physical context, right? I mean, GPS gives phones and devices the ability to understand where they are in the world globally. And what we're building with our, what we call a pose mesh, which we don't need to get too much into, but it's a spatial computing protocol that is distributed and decentralized. What that enables is for any device to understand where it is in the context of a certain coordinate system, right? And we can set up these coordinate systems, 3D coordinate systems in any physical space. We're focusing right now on retail stores. We can do it in warehouses. We can do it in event centers, which we have done, various conferences. We've done navigation for events between booths and things like this. So spatial computing is that capability of giving computers the ability to understand where they are in space, right? Where they are relative to each other. Augmented reality benefits from spatial computing because anytime you place digital content, whether it's 2D or even more importantly, if it's 3D, it needs to look and interact in a realistic way, right? I mean, it has a place in a physical context. And it's just like anything physical, like if it's signage or if it's a box or a product, like you want it to look realistic. You want to be able to walk around it from different angles and see from different angles like you do with a physical thing, whether it's a signage or a box, right? So augmented reality, does that make sense? So it benefits from spatial computing at a technical level. And so these technologies, these capabilities are intertwined. And that's why we're speaking about them in a related way. And the same, if you listen to Tim Cook, if you listen to Apple over the years, I mean, they didn't call this the era of augmented reality, even though Tim Cook for many years had said, augmented reality is as big as the smartphone. This is the future of what we're up to. This is where we see the future. But then when they announced the Vision Pro, they didn't say this is an AR device. They said this is a spatial computer. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting, right? I mean, I'm not going to presume to know every reason why Tim Cook and Apple decided to call this spatial computing. But I think augmented reality, if I were to guess and speak for how we think at Auki Labs, augmented reality is a capability. It's a visual way of interacting and engaging with information and content that is enabled by spatial computing. But spatial computing is a much bigger capability that can allow vehicles to navigate autonomously, and robots and various other kinds of capabilities in the near future that are in addition to augmented reality.
So in 2 years, if we're talking, are you even using the word augmented reality or is it just spatial computing?
I think augmented reality is still relevant.
It's descriptive for sure.
It is. And you know as well as I do, right? I mean, these terms go in and out of style, right? I mean,
well, I help make them go in and out of style. That's kind of my job.
So, yes. I mean, so...
There's one I really want to bury. I haven't buried it yet, but I'm working on it.
Okay. Are we going to keep that a secret then?
Oh, everyone knows.
What term that is?
Omnichannel.
Yeah.
I hate the term.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to get any resistance from me on that. We like convergent commerce, which is part of why we call the product convergent. But also it's about convergence of digital and physical, right? Bringing these things together and making it possible to place digital content and information in physical space. But augmented reality, I think as long as the term is useful and recognized, we'll use it. We aren't using it much when we're speaking with retailers, actually, because what we find is that we do better and our product does better when we don't talk about the technology so much. I mean, much less than we're talking about here. I mean, we're all interested in it, but retailers generally are just like, I need to save time, I need to save money. How do I do that, right? And so we're just laser focused on associate productivity, reducing onboarding time and training costs.
Yeah.
How do you get your operations to run more efficiently? And then on the shopper marketing side, like how do you meet shoppers where they are with more relevant information, help them to find more of what they're looking for, drive bigger basket size, and we're speaking to their sort of business needs. So it does sometimes take something for technologists to start speaking the language of the customer, but that's the language of the customer.
Well, I think there's almost a first where the customers are ahead of the technologist in that regard. Yeah. You know, it's interesting if you walk the floor here at the conference, there's at least 2 or 3 autonomous vehicles clearly positioned for last mile delivery, which I just hadn't really thought about, but that's spatial computing, correct?
100%.
So if a retailer is building, I mean, every major grocer, I don't know if I have the right to say their names, but you can just guess who they are. They're already in very deep pilots with these autonomous vehicles. There's some issues. Apparently, if you have a steering wheel, that allows you to do things. If you don't have a steering wheel, that's a whole different regulatory situation, which was fascinating. It was a new learning. But the second you're starting to talk about last mile delivery, if you're talking about your spatial computing model, me as an analyst, I think, oh my gosh, that's a massive new area of spend that we're going to want to study, we're going to want to survey. So do we need to begin to start thinking about the terms differently and getting the terms correct, where I wouldn't get that with augmented or virtual realities? So it's probably time to make that switch. Shift.
So it wasn't just us feeling gratified that Apple started using a term that we've been using for a while, spatial computing, but it's also, I mean, Apple leads the market in the real way. And so, I mean, they thought very carefully about the term they use to describe what this thing is, right? I mean, it's an expensive device. They've invested a lot. No doubt their long-term roadmap is populated with a lot more spatial computing and augmented reality devices. We know that since that launch or shortly after that launch in June, that we learned that they bought a small AR glasses company as well. So, I mean, and they've bought others over the years. So, I mean, the Vision Pro, just like their product naming tends to do, I mean, you can imagine a Vision or a Vision Air device in the next couple of years, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Just, you can make inferences based on how they name products and where they're headed. But the point is, for them to say there was personal computing introduced by the Macintosh, of course, they're taking credit for each of these eras, right? But there was the Mac with personal computing, there was the iPhone that introduced mobile computing, and now we've got Vision Pro, which introduces spatial computing. So that's a small set eras and thing that they're talking about here. So they've selected these terms very carefully, right?
Yeah.
So to me, even if no one else was using the term, which is not the case, right? I mean, but even if no one else was using the term, this term spatial computing would be important to pay attention to for that reason.
Have you seen analysts begin to forecast the space other than the last mile? I don't know that I've heard that term and get tied to market forecasts and whatnot, but I mean, it's a massive number. It's a massive.
It is. And as you're pointing to, yes, I mean, autonomous vehicles, robotics. I mean, so our booth is A366 here at Grocery Shop. And just a few booths over, there's a company, Fabric, which you've probably seen or heard of. I mean, in their booth, they've got robots carrying products that are part of order fulfillment. And they have, just as we do, we haven't mentioned this yet in this conversation here, but we use QR codes that devices, once we've set up what we call a domain, the coordinate system in a space, a device, then a phone scans this QR code and then it is in this 3D coordinate system. But their robots are wheeled, right? They're wheeled carts that are scanning QR codes on the floor of their booth. Stop by and see how this works. But it's similar, right? I mean, those robots know where they are in the warehouse by scanning QR codes that are each unique on the floor, and they navigate that way. And so it's another form of spatial computing that uses similar kinds of markers to understand where they are. So the point is, this is, you know, as you pointed out, autonomous vehicles, there's Cruise, right? Which has, it's also
just two booths down from Fabric, which is a fascinating stop.
So we're in the same aisle.
That's a big aisle. That's a major aisle.
So you got to come by and see.
I was there. I stopped by.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Great.
I would think, Jeff, just to blow your mind, right? I mean, in some ways, I expect to see analysts who are going to try to forecast this. You can define spatial computing to be so inclusive of so many areas. It's like when you see those forecasts of what's the forecast for AI technology?
$5 trillion.
Right? It's
I go on the record right now. The market is $5 trillion.
It's $5 trillion.
It's tied to nothing, but I guarantee you that's what the number.
Well, look, I mean, you know, Andreessen, right, years ago said software is eating the world, right? I mean, software that doesn't incorporate AI now is not competitive, right? And I think before too long, devices and solutions that don't incorporate spatial computing in some way are not going to be
around
competitive. I think it may take 3 to 5 years, right? But the point is,
but that could very well be where we're headed.
So what does a retailer need to do today if they listen to this podcast and they hadn't really heard of spatial computing, but they say, "Oh wow, okay, we clearly are thinking of last mile delivery. We're clearly see what you're talking about. What do we need to do to our organization to take advantage of spatial computing?"
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, one of the simple ways is that we've realized that by providing these simple apps that are mobile apps that run on our backend, our spatial computing platform, you can participate in our pilot or beta program and see, do these apps actually shave time off everyday retail tasks, whether it's restocking or onboarding, training, learning how to stock a shelf so it's really the picture of success as your planogram indicates, or even starting to use planograms. Many retailers we've found, surprisingly, aren't using planograms. And we have a very easy to use solution that you can place planograms in augmented reality in these apps and put the planogram right in front of the shelf so that you're looking at the shelf, you see overlaid on the physical shelf an image of what product should go where, right? So it's just like, it's almost like put the square peg in the square hole.
That's
right. It's that simple. So the point is there's no training needed. There's just use the app, show up in front of the shelf with the right products, put them where they go. And so try it out. Yeah. I mean, the answer to your question, I think, is reach out to us and we can show you what we can do. I mean, if you're at Grocery Shop, I mean, come to our booth, A366. But yeah, Auki videos and more information and just reach out. We do virtual demos as well. It's easy for us to demo this over Zoom or Meet in a video way, but we can also meet up very easily with just about anybody because we've got coverage around the world and do demos in person, partnering with a lot of retailers to do that. And also like retail solution integrators is a way we're going to market as well because
I would think you have a pretty attractive story, right, for any system integrator that's looking to add things into their portfolio to get into the spatial computing space and be the guide for those retailers.
Because we're not we noticed yesterday we're doing our research heading into this show, and there are about 60 retail task management solution providers, right? It's a pretty well populated category. And I mean, really, retail task management in its essence isn't that different from any kind of task management workflow, right? It's like, Jeff, you need to do this thing, so I'm going to assign it to your account, and I'm going to type in some notes about what it is and maybe when it needs to be done, and then you can mark it complete. And there are these basic aspects of what it is to do task management. What we add is the ability to actually bring you to the physical location in the store where that task needs to be performed, right? And so that's something that we think is really different, that we're not seeing.
And it's very
task
visual.
Management. Yeah, and it's also the source of miscommunication and mistakes, right? It's very visual, but it also brings you to that physical
but you see the final outcome, right? So you have the ability to, it's not just here's the task, but here's what it's supposed to look like.
Especially in the context of...
in context of where it is supposed to be.
Right. Especially in the case of restocking or merchandising a shelf so that it matches the planogram. Absolutely.
Do you sit on top task management solution, or are you a completely your own store task management solution?
Yes. Good question. Okay. So right now we have apps that run just on our own back end, but we are in the throes again in the process of conversations with various retail task management companies to look at how we can integrate. As I was just describing, I mean, we see this as a additional dimension of existing retail task management. We don't want to reinvent that entire wheel, but we do have the ability to enhance the effectiveness and the associate productivity associated with existing retail task management
That
solutions.
would make a lot more sense because I mean, if you're trying to unincome all those players, that would be a challenge. But playing on top of them, it sounds like a much faster, easier road.
We think so. And then similarly with the shopper marketing side of things, right? Like I mentioned, the big retailers really want to continue to drive uptake and adoption of their first-party mobile apps, right? And they have the data about the customer, the first-party data that can inform and even personalize the promotions that are being presented or the marketing content that's being presented to their customers in the store. And so we want to be an enabling capability inside of those apps. So this is why we built our SDK that can be integrated into those apps.
And that's where we pop back over the customer side.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Yeah. Wow.
So, I mean, again, just to summarize it, I mean, this is why we're calling this a spatial computing platform. I mean, it's not because we want to talk so much about the technology. It's just that it is this broad set of capabilities, just like a mobile computing platform, right? I mean, what can you build on a mobile computer, like an iPhone or an Android phone? A lot of different stuff, right? And so we're bringing something to market that is that level of essential infrastructure, like an operating system for placing digital content and information in physical space, that we think over years is going to play out as that general purpose platform. We're starting with retail, both shopper marketing and retail operations, and we see it as a much bigger opportunity, right? So
third-party logistics, last mile delivery. I mean, you're starting to pop in any geolocation. So you're talking malls, you're talking...
Well, I think you just justified your $5 trillion forecast, Jeff.
There we go.
Apparently we don't... forecasting is a little different than when it got started, where you actually... Well, never mind.
That's another podcast.
That's another podcast. I know. I think you sold me, Neil, on the idea that is a defined category, spatial computing. That has a lot of feed in a lot
of potential.
Places.
I mean, it's a platform. I mean, as we're talking about a new platform, so lots and possibilities. So again, back to your $5 trillion forecast.
I think also,
you know what? If that shows up somewhere, it's
going to be quoted from this podcast. Gosh. Jeff Roster, $5 trillion forecast.
I wanted to go 17 trillion, but I think somebody already grabbed that number for something else.
You heard it here first. But I think we'll also, for what it's worth, right? I think between now and the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to hear a lot more from Apple as well as others, right? I mean, what their focus with spatial computing, right, is kind of lean back on your couch, content consumption. I mean, that's what we saw most of, right, in the launch. And so that was a very broad introducing the public at large, right, to what spatial computing can be from an Apple perspective. Like, what do people already know and love and understand, right? But I think there will be more from Apple that will help us generally understand the size, the potential, the capabilities, because they're not just about, as a company, entertainment or sitting on your couch and watching videos and movies. It's a good place to start because it's a common
it gets adoption, right? I mean, that's a way to get consumer adoption.
Everyone
which
does
is
this,
key
right?
for every one of these new platforms and things that comes out. Ultimately, it's another podcast, but you can debate what happened to Metaverse. It's because it missed that adoption piece.
And similarly, one thing I'll leave people with, right, is that some people ask, you've got this big vision of spatial computing, and that's much bigger than retail and at the scale of mobile computing or even bigger. Why grocery, right? Why this retail focus even? And I think we probably mentioned this last time we spoke, is that everybody is a grocery shopper. Everybody shops on a regular basis. And so this is context for crossover, sort of crossing the chasm, if you will, from niche to everyday, right? And we really are believers in augmented reality and spatial computing becoming an everyday technology that people use. And another phrase that we've liked to use is from toy to tool, right? Augmented reality has really been a toy for quite a while. That makes you laugh because
started on that one.
It seems clever, right? But it's just a nice alliteration that describes like what we feel like we're on the cusp of this. And entertainment is one thing, but we feel like everyone does need to shop for groceries, right? So if we can make a difference there, then I think we can maybe make a difference elsewhere.
And you're also not going to have any other industry where you have the stores or the associate and the customer engaged in billions of interactions over the course of a year. I can't think of anything. I mean, hospitals, but not at that level.
Not in the same way. Not in the same way that generates a transaction, right?
And I thought it's very insightful to say that literally 100% of us are grocery shoppers, unless you're homesteading somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, which at some point you become a seed shopper or so you literally have the entire population.
And then we've got, if you're a hunter-gatherer, maybe you can use our software to find out where the berries are, where the nuts are. I don't know.
That's right.
Well, you laugh, but I
you can see it happening. You could see that happening.
My sister pulls out her augmented reality app as we were walking through Golden Gate Park, identifying many of these very special species. So we're already there. Actually,
there you go.
I'm taking notes, Jeff. You just inspired a whole new vertical.
I don't know. You may have taken your forecast to 5.5 trillion.
There you go. 7 trillion. It's going up.
I heard 7 trillion.
It's going up trillions in the course of a week.
7 trillion.
Like the hunter-gatherer market.
Yeah, that's right. Well, on that super fascinating, entertaining, and I don't know, maybe somewhat educational note, I think we bring this pod to a close today. Neil, I want to thank you for joining us and giving us this pretty interesting update on where you're headed and what's happening with Auki, and giving us a lot of additional use cases to think about that are going to fuel Jeff's future spatial computing forecast.
There you go. Sounds like a plan.
Excellent. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Always a pleasure.
Bet. See ya.
If you enjoyed our show, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember to smash that subscribe button in your favorite podcast player or on YouTube so you don't miss a minute. If you haven't tried Goodpods player yet, give them a spin and follow our show. We recently hit the top of the charts in indie management and marketing podcasts. We love hearing feedback from our listeners. If you want to know more about what we talked about today, take a look at the show notes for handy links and more deets. I'm your co-host, Casey Golden.
And if you'd like to connect with us and share your feedback, follow us and the show on Twitter at KCCGolden, Ricardo_Belmar, and at Retail Razor, or find us on LinkedIn. And if you want even more from us, be sure and subscribe to our Substack newsletter for full episode transcripts and bonus content. I'm your host, Ricardo Belmar.
Thanks for joining us.
And remember, there's never been a better time to be in retail if you cut through the clutter. Until next time, this is the Retail Razor Show.